Hello, and welcome to Logic and Critical Thinking. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to solve problems, right? And the application of logic and critical thinking to be able to actually achieve some sort of a pragmatic end by dealing with some sort of an issue or a problem that has a potential course of action that can be taken to lead to some sort of a amicable solution to that problem. Okay, so the idea of using critical thinking to think about problems and using the procedural means of coming to understand a phenomenon to apply that to some sort of a problematic phenomenon or a problematic situation. Okay, so you utilize critical thinking, hopefully inherently to some degree, and use it to continually solve problems throughout your life. Hopefully, you've been doing that since you were a very young individual, being able to think things through and be able to come to certain solutions to problems. I mean, perhaps sometimes more successfully than others. So hopefully, being aware of this information is going to allow you to uh, improve your success rate in dealing with problems. But basically, problems are crucibles. They're tests. They're trials that really forge the strength of your character, right? And the more you are able to, first and foremost, um, address problems with a critical approach. Subsequently, if you're actually able to solve problems, I think it makes you a better person because you will be able to face additional challenges as they come your way. Okay. So, your quality of life is something that is indeed influenced by your competency as a problem solver. And generally speaking, those individuals who are better able to meet life's challenges and come to good solutions to the issues as they arise tend to live happier lives as a result, right? Because in that way, the problems don't compound and weigh down the individual more than they otherwise need to. Okay, so becoming a problem solver then is indeed a skill that you are capable of learning. Now, some people are inherently better at the task, and if you believe the idea of there being, multiple learning styles and multiple uh, areas of focus that individuals might be inherently better at. If you ever received or read the book "What Color Is Your Parachute," for example, some people might be better at certain things because of the interest that they have or the types of experiences that they've had in life. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn to problem solve in areas that perhaps you haven't always been familiar with. And now I'd like to, suggest the process that goes into um, solving problems, regardless of their origin, regardless of the uh, type of situation that you find yourself in. Okay, um, so I suggest this is a good way to analyze a problem, and through the appropriate analysis, you can then narrow down the best way to ultimately approach those problems. Okay, so the first step is to ask, what is the problem? Right? To be able to define the problem, to be able to identify what is going into the situation that is problematic, that is causing some degree of strain or a negative impact of some sort. Okay. Step two is to identify the alternatives. So we talked about, critical thinking and the idea of gathering information to be able to establish different alternative ways of dealing with a situation. You're going to want to do that to solve problems as well. Step three, you want to discuss what are the advantages and the disadvantages of each alternative, right? So the pros and the cons, the costs and the benefits that might be associated with each of the alternatives. And when I say costs, I don't necessarily mean pure monetary dollars and cents, for example, costs that may be associated with each of the alternatives, but rather, what might some of the implications and impacts, and like I mentioned in some of my previous discussions, externalities or unintended consequences, what might be present in taking one course of action over another course of action. And again, thinking about things like crucial difference in the situation by choosing one alternative or another, thinking of the legal and the social and the political ramifications of a decision, in addition to just the straight up costs and benefits and weighing those against each other. Okay. Step four, what is the solution? What is it that you're going to choose among all the different alternatives? What satisfies the greatest amount of, what confers the greatest amount of benefit, I should say, while having the least amount of detriment to you as a result? And then step five is to determine how well the solution is working. How can you evaluate the validity of your choice, the merit of your choice, right? That can come from analyzing any policy decisions that were made, any conceptual ideas that have been brought forward to try to deal with the problem, or actual physical steps, a program of some sort, and evaluating what the hiccups were, what the roadblocks or speed bumps might have been as you were implementing it, and then ultimately evaluating whether or not it was successful after a certain period of time, essentially in the end, right? So effective problem solvers learn to apply these steps in flexible and imaginative ways. So a big part of the problem solving process is to be able to take these 5 steps and literally apply it to any kind of a situation that may arise that is problematic. And again, sometimes we're dealing with something that has very physical results. Sometimes it may be something that isn't as straightforward as something that could lead to a potential physical kind of a backlash against the person that has experienced the phenomenon or the problem. So again, you need to be able to apply things in oftentimes very vastly different circumstances and different scenarios in order to get solutions to the problem. Okay. There is a YouTube video in the presentation that I urge my students to watch. There is a video called Fentanyl, How a Drug from China is Killing Americans. So by now, I think most people are aware of the opioid crisis in the United States, and in particular, the latest element of that, which is the introduction of fentanyl into the drug supply in the United States. So the long and the short of it, a lot of independent chemical and pharmaceutical producers in China developed fentanyl, which has many uses, including the sedation of large animals and things like that. And that has slowly found its way into the mostly illicit drug supply, coming from places like Mexico, for example, which acquires a lot of the fentanyl from these independent producers, and then mixes it or cuts it with other drugs. And it's leading to a very significant problem, and has been a problem here in the United States. It is the drug that is killing the most Americans in the last few years here. So those who are not my students, you can go ahead and do a search on YouTube for the title of this video, and you can watch that. And then I urge I do want to skip ahead. We're not going to actually watch that. I don't want to get into that, even though it's a fairly short video. So now, once you have the opportunity to watch this video, I would urge you to go ahead and apply these different steps to potentially identifying how you might be able to deal with the fentanyl, how perhaps the United States collectively through government action and otherwise might be able to solve the problem of fentanyl and the dangers that it poses. So the first thing you might want to do is determine what the central issues are by asking three distinct questions here. Number one, what do I know about the situation? And again, you want to be able to apply this in all circumstances, but with regard to fentanyl in particular, what do you know about the situation? What, maybe once you've watched the video, you can go on and try to find additional materials on the topic, see how the situation is today, since that video is from a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Then move on to asking, what results am I aiming for in this situation? What is it that you hope to accomplish, right? So perhaps collectively as a society, we want to minimize the number of deaths from fentanyl, as an example. And then, of course, how can I define the problem? Again, that depending on the situation, you're going to approach that different ways. You might want to think of, conceptual definitions of the problem just to kind of get an understanding of what's going on without necessarily anything actionable. And then you want to go ahead and you want to operationalize those definitions, which means that you define the problem in a way that you can feasibly address it through some sort of action or research policy programs or perhaps even legislation. Okay, so how can you define the problem with regard to fentanyl? Perhaps that there is an importation of fentanyl that is in the illegal drug supply that is leading to an inordinate number of deaths in the United States. Okay, so now that you've established what the problem is, you can move on to step two and determine what the alternatives might be to that problem. So you want to examine actions that might be able to help solve the problem and determine which actions are possible and which really aren't. What isn't feasible to be able to do. Okay, so you want to explore the boundaries of the problem situation and ask yourself, what are the boundaries and what alternatives are possible within these boundaries, right? So when we talk about the boundaries to dealing with problems, again, as I mentioned before, the political, social, and legal ramifications of any decision, sure. But in addition to that, just, considering the feasibility of a solution. So, how much money, for example, is available to be able to tackle the problem, right? You can come up with a solution that costs, $50 trillion to implement, and it'll definitely get rid of the problem. But where are you going to get $50 trillion to be able to spend on that problem, right? So it might not be possible, it might not be feasible to take that particular course of action due to financial, monetary constraints. Number two, of course, time constraints, right? You can come up with a solution to the problem that'll take 100 years to implement, which, in some cases is good for certain types of problems, things that have been intergenerational, things that have been going on for hundreds or even thousands of years as a problem. Sure, if it's something that you can implement at any point in the future, might be a good course of action to take. But in the case of something like fentanyl, for example, you probably want a lot more immediate results, something that can really result in changes within a year or two in order for the problem to be somewhat alleviated. And then, of course, the third element of feasibility is accessibility, right? Um, you as a student or somebody that is just a layperson, watching this on a random YouTube channel that you stumbled across, um, your accessibility to certain resources or to certain individuals that could effectuate change. You might not be able to be in a position where that becomes possible, right? So, part of my solution is sitting down with the president of the United States and outlining these ideas and these points. I mean, certainly certain individuals may have the ability to make that sort of thing happen. But lamentably, even though I have been a university professor for about 16 years now, I've written a couple of books, and now I have this fantastic YouTube channel. In addition to teaching my students, I've never actually had the opportunity to sit down with any of the presidents and talk to them about any sort of policy. And even though I have my bachelor's degree in political science and master's and doctorates in public administration, honestly don't really know how I could, as an individual, find my way to the office of the president, right? And for a lot of people, that's just not going to be a reality. Now, I imagine that if I set my mind to it, I could find a way, but I don't know that I could accomplish it in the amount of time that we would want there to be a solution to this fentanyl problem. So, in that case, if part of my solution, for example, would be to sit down with the president, it doesn't necessarily mean that I shouldn't go ahead and pursue the problem otherwise, or the solution to the problem otherwise. It's just that, hopefully I'd be able to find another target to be able to present the information to that is a little bit easier to get to, gain access to, in order to make it a little bit more feasible. Okay, so step 3 is to determine what the advantages and the disadvantages are of each of the different alternative approaches to solving the problem. So after you identify various alternatives, the next step, of course, is to evaluate them, to look at the pros and cons, to determine what the costs and the benefits are. So, what are the advantages of each alternative? How much change, perhaps, would you be able to set into motion as the result of taking the choice that you're intending to take? What are the disadvantages then of each alternative? What are the negative impacts that could be associated with the choice that you've made? And then what additional information do I need to evaluate each alternative? What do I need to go out and find additional information about in order to be able to make this happen? What kind of additional research, for example, do I need to be able to undertake to be able to better define and be able to better mold and craft the solution that I have chosen? Okay. And of course, step 4 is, what is the solution? You need to decide on one of those different alternatives, decide on a thoughtful course of action based on your increased understanding, right? So which among the alternatives will you choose to pursue to be able to deal with the problem, right? So you want to evaluate and compare the alternatives. Perhaps you want to combine alternatives, take multiple courses of action if possible, and then try out each alternative, at least in your imagination or otherwise, to see if there is a potential way of doing that. Another thing you could potentially do is do a pilot study where you would try out the alternative on a smaller scale before rolling it out on the larger scale, just to see, if it is as effective as you think it might be, and to, identify some of those, bumps along the way or the pitfalls that may come from the chosen alternative And then ultimately, you want to ask yourself, what steps can you take to act on the alternative that has been chosen? What can be done to make it happen? And then, of course, once you've determined all of that information, you actually make it happen. Okay. And then, of course, step 5 is how well the solution is ultimately working, right? Your analysis is limited because you cannot anticipate or predict the future, right? And even if something has worked in other circumstances, in other scenarios, it doesn't mean that necessarily the course of action will be taken, right? And that it'll achieve the same results. So, for example, a few years back, I worked with the Los Angeles Police Department's Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force with a couple of my colleagues from Cal State Northridge. And we were putting together a crime prevention through environmental design program, one that mimicked some successful programs in, I believe, Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And we came up with a series of different steps that the city of Los Angeles could potentially take to tackle human trafficking issues, specifically along the Figueroa corridor in, I guess that would be South Los Angeles. And unfortunately, the LAPD didn't necessarily choose to implement our suggestions, even though it was very, very successful in reducing human trafficking incidences in some of the other countries in which it had been implemented, right? And that's because, they anticipated potentially that the solution would not necessarily play out the same way in Los Angeles as it would in a smaller country and a smaller city like the ones that it was utilized in abroad. Okay. So try these critical thinking questions. What is your evaluation of the process? And we can certainly go into more about program evaluation and, ultimately determining the degree to which the solution alternative that has been chosen actually accomplished what it set out to accomplish. And then, of course, asking what adjustments are necessary. And again, that's going to be part of that evaluative process and what we call formative evaluation, where you try to identify, again, those problems that come from implementing the solution, implementing the program, and trying to avoid those problems in the future by again, anticipating that those kinds of, again, pitfalls, roadblocks, uh, speed bumps are likely to occur along the way and could lead to different outcomes than what you would ultimately want to accomplish by choosing the solution that has been undertaken. Okay. And so the last thing to kind of remember here is that this 5-step approach to solving your problems is going to be effective for personal problems as well as for problems that we face as citizens of a community, a society, and the world. These are the same steps that are undertaken by, individuals in Congress at the federal level of the United States government, sitting down and trying to come up with solutions to different problems. These same 5 steps are utilized and implemented. Basically, you have a bunch of, you identify a problem, or, in the case of the State of the Union address, for example, perhaps the President of the United States will identify some sort of a problem. And then the individuals in the Senate will come together in committees to try to define what that problem is a little bit further, and then start to develop different alternative solutions to the problem. Ultimately, they come up with some sort of a course of action and then present that, in terms of legislation or what have you. And then, of course, that legislation can then be taken by the executive branch, taken by the president in this case, And programs can be developed within the bureaucracy to try to tackle the problem based on the legislation or statute or what have you that the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives ultimately voted on to be able to accomplish whatever it is that needs to be accomplished. And whatever problem needs to be solved, hopefully, will at least be addressed, if not solved outright. Okay, so the next section here, the next video that we're going to be looking at will be about beliefs and the types of judgments that people make based on their personal beliefs. And kind of pre-existing ideas that they have about the way that the world works and operates, and how that could potentially be a positive thing, and ways in which that could actually detract from solving some of the problems that may be facing us because we have a belief system that is outdated or that doesn't necessarily have the problem-solving capability that we would hope that it has. So I look forward to having you watch the next video. Until then, have a fantastic day.